Hey, everybody. Patrick Honor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Man, we got some boxing to talk about because there was boxing this past weekend and this coming weekend. We got some stuff coming up. I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, copy box operator and fellow boxing maniac. What's up, man?
How's everything, my man?
Doing all
Yeah,
right,
we
dude.
absolutely have a lot to talk about. There was a big heavyweight fight that we were discussing earlier this week and last week, excuse me. And there's a couple of major cards coming up that everybody's been really excited about coming up this weekend. So yeah,
Yeah, we're definitely in kind of a busy time or whatever for boxing. It's kind of like kicking up in the next few weeks and it's gonna sustain us for a little bit. But dude, last weekend, they say, and I think that we generally agree that there's no boxing like heavyweight boxing. Unfortunately, this was not a fantastic fight overall, but generally speaking, it was good to see Tyson Fury back in the ring. Um, just wish it would have been a little bit more competitive. And I mean, there's so many asterisks kind of attached to this fight now that like we could barely even talk about the fight. That's just how it goes.
totally. But when it comes to being competitive, there was a lot of people that thought that Dillian Whyte definitely would be competitive. I mean, given his track record, he's definitely proven himself to be the number one contender for a long time. He's fought in who's who of the division of this era for the most part, except for the very top guys. And there was a lot more expectations of what he was going to be able to do at Fury, who, like you just kind of alluded to, had a lot of out of the ring distractions going on. Plus, he was coming off of a grueling fight with Wilder. It was kind of a wild card. But instead, he came in with one of the most boneheaded strategies of recent memory, which is coming into the ring and turning southpaw for the first time, fighting southpaw for the first time in how long did they say? Forever, basically.
Yeah, I mean, he's not
I
really
mean,
known
it's not
for.
something he's ever known for doing, but I don't know if that was to throw Fury off or whatever it was, but that's just something kind of like when Sor Rungvisai did that in the rematch what was it, Estrada, right? Yeah, in the rematch with Estrada when he turned southpaw and fought like that for like the first had whatever it was amount of rounds before he decided to realize it was being stupid, turned it back, and instead of having success and made it a closer fight. Kind of the same thing. Like, you don't just fight southpaw suddenly when you don't do that over the years. It's just makes no sense. It's not going to confuse your opponent. If anything, it's going to make you more uncomfortable and make the fight less competitive because you have no clue what you're actually doing when you do that. You think you do,
Yeah,
but then you get into the real world and you just kind of like it's so.
yeah.
And Fury's not a guy that ever really gets frazzled, anyways. He's seen it all. He kind of deals with it. He has an unorthodox style that he adapts himself as a fight goes on, and he knows what's going on. So it's like that wasn't going to bother him. And in fact, it just made it easier.
To me, switching stances, and I mean, I know that there are fighters who have done it successfully, and there are some fighters who do it successfully. Uh, you know, we've seen the Charlo brothers do it. We've seen Terrence Crawford do it. I'm not saying that fighters can't do it, but overall, what like the switching stances shit to me, that's like the hallmark of like a really amateurish fighter who doesn't really know what the hell they're doing. I mean, generally speaking, if somebody's in there switching stances, it's like, oh boy, this is not going to end well. Because it's like, that's the kind of thing where it's very few fighters can pull it off successfully and safely. And then on top of that, it's like, it's not even effective. Like, there's no point in doing that shit. It's not going to do anything for you. Almost nobody can actually fight as well left-handed as they can right-hand. I mean, it's unheard of almost. So I mean, that kind of shit is just, it's like novelty stuff, dude. It looks cool, it seems cool, but it doesn't do anything. And it was a dumb, I guess, like you said, to throw off Tyson Fury early on or something, but it didn't. Like, nothing happened.
So here's one. Remember the video I sent you probably a month or so back when we were like messaging each other? It was Ezra Sellers against Johnny Yaya McClain, which
Yeah,
was a cruiserweight undercard fight, very deep on
yeah,
the
he got, dude.
yeah, and that was the same thing. He was trying to switch southpaw and be cute, and like you going back and forth in styles for no rhyme or reason. It wasn't like like you just what you just mentioned. There wasn't like any rhythm to it or anything. He was just kind of switching back and forth. And Ezra Sellers, who was a hell of a puncher, and a very exciting fighter back in his time, timed him perfectly, caught him with a shot that was a beautiful shot, just flatlined him right there. McLean somehow got up, but then had his ankle broken, and the fight was stopped soon after. But I mean, that's a good example right there of what you want to talk about, like trying to switch stances when you're not really naturally doing that, like a Crawford or a Hagler or even a guy like Whitaker, for example, who didn't do it often. But I'm saying, someone who was able to do something like that. It's not natural. If it's not natural for you to be able to do something, then eventually someone's going to be able to time it quickly and blast you out of there.
Yeah, it's a foolish move, dude. And Dillian Whyte is not the kind of fighter that's like a slickster or smooth or anything like that. He's the kind of fighter where he should have from the beginning been. And there were a couple of moments. I thought that he maybe could have won a round. I want to say it was like the third or fourth, only because he got body punching in and he was able to take the fight to the ropes and kind of rough Tyson Fury up a little bit. He wasn't like clearly winning the round by any means whatsoever. But I thought that again, he could have like taken a round, maybe. But that was the kind of fight that he needed to do. He needed to take Fury to the ropes. He needed to get inside on him, go to the body, use his forearms, elbows, head, whatever the case may be. And I think that that's exactly what he didn't do. He fell into the trap literally right away. In the first round, by the end of the first round, I even tweeted something to the effect of, shit, if Dillian Whyte's already buying into the feints, then it's over, because that is Tyson Fury's game. That's specifically one of the things that he's been able to do very effectively in over his rise to the heavyweight title and he basically outdid Vladimir Klitschko with feints. He hit him like a half a dozen times or something like that in the first round, but then just worked overtime on the feints and had Vladimir Klitschko buying on the feints all night long. He didn't like really hurt him, didn't do shit really. He just feinted him to death all night. And Klitschko was like, like buying on that shit. And once a fighter starts doing that with someone like Tyson Fury, it's like, that's the in he needs. That's all he needs to get in there. And so unless you're able to get in there and rattle him, take him off his game, something, dude, you're playing into exactly how he wants it, which is what Dillian Whyte did. So, I mean, it was not remotely a shock that it ended the way that it did. It's just a matter of, I think that this was what a lot of people were talking about. You mentioned earlier that Dillian Whyte earned his number one contender status, and I don't disagree. But at the same time, he can be deserving as a number one contender, but also be clearly out of Tyson Fury's league, which is what it looked like, that he's just not fast enough. He doesn't throw enough. He doesn't have the ability to kind of press with that strategy. So that's what we saw.
Absolutely, totally. But, and then, Fury, well, it was one of those things that like Fury even felt like when you're watching the fight, he was totally in control, but you still kind of like what Usyk sometimes with how he fights. You can just see that he was not going through the motions so much, but he wasn't really in the A gear that he needed to be. Like he didn't have to be. Everything was controlled. He knew what he was doing. Everything was just complete control. And that shows you when you're on an elite level of a type of fighter. When you're fighting a guy, even though Dillian Whyte looked inept in this fight, he, like we said, he's had a proven track record. Like, he's proven himself against very high quality opposition over the past few years and earned the status. And Fury showed that he's at a different level than even that. And only few guys in the sport are around that. You know what I mean? And when they are, they show their class eventually. And even like the best fighters, like Roy Jones used to do sometimes early back in the day. There was guys who were really, really good fighters. We're not talking about some of the guys you would slap around easily, but like, some fighters.
Officer Ricky Frazier or anything.
Exactly, for example. Yeah. But like certain guys who had the potential to be champion or like, top contenders, Roy made them just look like, just another guy. And that's what Fury was able to do with it. Fury showed his class at this point. That's why he's viewed upon as one of the best in the world. And a lot of people now are starting to speculate his, status and as an all-timer in history, which always inevitably happens whenever there's a big heavyweight who's like doing a lot of business and has a lot of popularity around him. Like Lennox Lewis wasn't that popular. So like back in the day, especially when social media wasn't around, wasn't really prevalent when Lewis was champion anyway. So if it was, maybe people would be talking about his all-time great status more so back then. But at that point too, if you read it in the magazines and everything else, more people downgraded Lewis as opposed to like as Fury is now, Fury is more popular, it seems, in the general consensus. And he seems to be more favorable when it comes to all-time great matchups now, surprisingly.
Well, the story after, so he winds up the uppercut from hell winds up catching Dillian. What's that?
That was a good uppercut.
It was. He timed it great. Dillian Whyte was, if you're listening to the kind of technical analyst type of folks in boxing, you know, he was keeping his head on that center line. He wasn't moving his head enough. He was just kind of following Tyson Fury around. And that was, we saw the product of that. Fury timed him, hit him with an uppercut. I think the uppercut didn't really land. It didn't smash him quite as it could have. And yeah, the push probably did help a little bit, but clearly the uppercut did the vast majority of the work. And so he takes him out in the 6th round. And the proclamation now from Tyson Fury, we've heard this from him a couple times, so it's really difficult to say how much we take him at his word here. But he says that he's going to retire, that he doesn't want to fight anymore. You know, that he made a promise or something like that he was going to retire after the 3rd Deontay Wilder fight. I would imagine that, for instance, if Anthony Joshua, if that fight comes up, or if he were to defeat Alexander Usyk in a rematch, then that fight would probably lure Fury back into the ring. But I mean, I guess for now, you got to take him at his word and assume that he's serious. And if he is, the debate, like you said, kind of starts rolling into the, well, where does he sit in history type of stuff. Of course, Tyson Fury is saying that he's the greatest of all time. I think it was Teddy Atlas saying that he was the greatest British heavyweight of all time.
Lewis.
I don't know, man. It's Teddy, you know. I don't know, but and then
I like Fury, bro. I like Fury a lot, but you got to be real here. If this is like the end of him, and he wants to go the Floyd route and fight like a crossover bout with Ngannou, who's the UFC heavyweight champion, then I'm sorry, man. His legacy is where it is. He's a very, very good fighter and had the potential to be a great champion.
And beating somebody like Francis Ngannou doesn't do anything for his boxing legacy.
Totally not. Just like Floyd beating Conor McGregor didn't do anything for his.
Yeah, it makes him a bigger superstar, but it doesn't. Yeah, I don't know, dude. It's similar to a discussion about Floyd, similar to a discussion about maybe one of the Klitschko's. Clearly, their talent and their ability make these fighters so that they can compete in just about any era. That doesn't mean that their resumes and that their ledgers are up to snuff when we're comparing them to older eras, and that's not their fault. That's not a knock on them. You know, I don't hate Floyd Mayweather just because I rate him, top 30 or 35 or whatever all time, instead of being like top 3 or some shit like somebody wants me to on Twitter or something. But I mean, that's not his fault that he was born when he was born. He fought who he was supposed to fight for the most part for his entire career. Just as Tyson Fury is not like ducking anybody. Vladimir Klitschko didn't duck anybody. It's just that you can't. Yeah, they don't have the depth of great fighters to defeat, to seat themselves alongside the greatest of all time. It's not their fault. It just is what it is. So, I mean,
it's fun though. Like, people can speculate if you really want.
Of course,
it's more fun to speculate. I would say doing like mythical fights between the guys as opposed to like trying to pull some on his pedestal. I find that
100%.
In my opinion,
100%.
Like, it's
he
easy.
Probably would have. Tyson Fury probably would have been fucking hell for like Muhammad Ali. Like, he probably would have been a total fucking nightmare stylistically.
Or Joe Louis. Or a lot of guys in history.
Yeah. Not to single out Ali, but yeah, exactly.
Just to throw a name out there. It's the easiest one to throw. Like, yeah, him. I think he would have gave Mike Tyson physically and mentally been an absolute nightmare for him stylistically wise. At the same time, though, Tyson could have caught him quickly, just like Joe Frazier, who showed his worth against big guys, even though he was thumped by Foreman. But like Buster Mathis Sr., who was a giant of his era, and a few other big guys of that time.
And
the Frazier of the Ali fight was able to get in Tyson Fury and move in on him, there's a good chance Fury would get laid out quickly. So
Right. And that's where the debate starts getting kind of fun, you know, like where it's like
Absolutely.
we obviously have seen, and you brought it up, I think some other, I don't remember when precisely, but you brought it up recently, the Tyson Fury Cunningham fight where Cunningham just, you know, with I think it was an
Yes.
overhand right, just flattened his ass. You know,
Loudest thing I've ever heard in my life, man. The whole sound like a thunderdome just around in the ring.
you give some other fighter that opportunity. You give Joe Louis an opportunity to land that right hand, and Tyson Fury is going to sleep. It's not, you know, that's not going to be. So yeah, the debate is it's lively, it's fun, but inevitably on social media, people are going to
It
kind of
always comes down to who wants, where does he land in history? And at this
yeah
point, it's hard to put him really in the top 10. This with the
yeah dude,
it's
it's
with
he's
the
only got
division
what
the way it is and how deep it is, and being one of the originals, and the depth of it and the history behind it and everything like that, and who's come before
yeah
him.
dude,
It's
it's tough, man, and he's only got 32 fights. And that's, again, it's not to say like, oh well, you can't get in there if you don't have 50 fights. Nah, it's not like that.
no, totally
It's just that if you only have 32 fights, though, those better be some fucking bangers on that 32 fight ledger, and they're like aren't really, you know, it's not a knock on him, but he doesn't have his signature win at this point is either going to be probably in that Deontay Wilder rubber match or Vladimir Klitschko when he won the title,
both
which
are
I
great
mean,
ones.
both are very good wins, but again, just do not hold up to the greatest, you know, heavyweight wins in
Especially
history.
when you keep on like looking at the full on resumes. Like if you compare it to Ali's, or if you compare it to Lewis's, or you compare it to this, others from that time, like over history.
Yeah.
So,
It's okay. We're not trying to hate on the guy. It's
but I
just
don't
that
think he's
it's
finished either. I think this is just talk until, like you said, things play out the way you do, and like I don't. He's not interested in fighting mandatory challengers or fighting a Tom Schwartz anymore, or Otto Wallen, even though he's struggling in that fight. But like things of that ilk, like he's looking for big cash outs now. He's at that point, like Mayweather or other guys, where he's looking for the biggest available fight. He doesn't really have to do mandatories at this point, even if the belts aren't really there. Because at the when you get to that type of level, something will get thrown at you. Someone will sanction something for you. You'll just pick it up. It doesn't even matter. Like whatever he
yeah.
knows he's the money player in that division. And like you said, if Joshua is able to win a rematch with Usyk, then he'll definitely be able to. He would definitely fight Joshua because he knows he views Joshua as a guy that's beneath him and unbeatable. Usyk, it's a different matter. Like you mentioned, the Cunningham fight. Fury definitely has trouble with guys a lot smaller than him to deal with, and Usyk is a much higher caliber fighter than Cunningham ever would.
Listen to me, you big stiff idiot.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a whole other one. That would be an absolutely fascinating fight that I would love to see, but that one I'm not sure would be as likely as opposed to seeing Joshua.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if they could put together enough money, it might be enough for him. I don't even know if it is about money. I mean, like I
But the
said,
Ngannou fight might be likely, man. He brought him into the ring afterwards. They both seemed very agreeable about it, and I would not be surprised. I wouldn't really be really interested in it, even though I'd still watch it. But it is what it is. I mean, Fury's already in the UFC video game along with Joshua, so might as well.
well, and also like on the UFC tip, dude, Francis Ngannou, I think that he wants to be anywhere but in an octagon fighting next. I think that he's probably not going to outright say it because he's still, you know, at the whim of UFC and what they want to do, I guess. But at the same time, excuse me, I would imagine he feels pretty disrespected, that he
As he
doesn't feel
should.
well, and he should. Yeah, I mean, a lot of mixed martial artists should, frankly, a lot of just about everybody in the UFC roster should financially, but you know, he probably feels pretty disrespected and not very protected or whatever within that organization. So it sounds like he's, you know, there have been rumors about him talking with BKFC. There's been rumors about him trying to do something in boxing, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like he's trying to do just about anything but that. And that would at least be kind of intriguing. But again, like we both said, it wouldn't really do anything for Tyson Fury's legacy. Um, and I mean, I don't know. To me, it's not again, not hatred, but it's like if you're already kind of at a point, my thought would be like, if you're already at a point where you're like, well, I just retire, I don't really want to fight anymore, then you probably should just fucking retire, man. Like, don't play around and then wind up getting knocked out in your next fight because you're just not really into it, even if it's a big fight or you took off 2 years.
Lennox Lewis, Ocean's 11. Lennox Lewis, Ocean's 11.
Yep, dude, straight
South
up.
Africa, Hasim Rockman. Yep.
Straight up.
I mean,
dude.
just saying, when your mind's not into it and your whole, you're into all up in the movies and all up in the videos.
Yep.
Holding Suge Knight over here.
Every other video. Yeah, it's I don't know, dude. I don't have any.
Fury fan, though.
What's that?
I'm a big Fury fan though, so I hope he does have like a few more legit fights in him because I enjoy watching him, and I enjoy his personality and everything too. You know?
I think that he's fun, and I think that overall, he's pretty good for boxing, but. Entertainment wise,
I remember him singing after the Cunningham fight when I was there the first time. After he got dropped and they ended up stopping him and all that other stuff, and still he had a full on head of hair back then, and he got up and sang. What was it? Probably still in early afternoon. Yeah, it was still early afternoon at Madison Square Garden and serenaded the whole audience. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely a throwback to a number of different fighters too. Renty Monaghan, the old flyweight champion, used to do that shit. Entertainment wise, he can be pretty hit or miss, but I don't really have any sort of issue with him. But like I said, he's usually better for the division, better for boxing if he sticks around. So hopefully he does for that reason.
For sure.
But I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see what happens.
So before we move on, though, if you want to see a comparable knockout to what you saw with Dillian Whyte against with Fury knocking out Dillian Whyte, just look it up on YouTube. You'll be able to find it. Go back to 1954 when Tiberio Mitri, who was an Italian middleweight contender, who fought Jake LaMotta for the championship, losing a nondescript decision. But he was a very good fighter. European guy that fought minimally a few times in the city in America, but mostly known in the European scene. Top flight. Knocks out Randy Turpin, former middleweight champion, the guy most notably for upsetting Sugar Ray Robinson in the very first round, in which was deemed pretty much an upset. And so the footage goes, and I remember watching this as a kid because it's on the video 30 Great One Punch Knockouts. That's the first time I saw it. But you can see it, it's on YouTube. Mitri, I think, comes in with a left hook. So that's what it was. They're just kind of moving, comes in, boom, hits him with a left hook. Turpin freezes, and Mitri, boom, completely shoves him, double hands him like you're passing the basketball, and Turpin just crashes and bounces the head out the canvas, doesn't move, and the fight's over. That one was
definitely far more like
you know what I'm talking
exaggerated.
About, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know the video you're talking about too. I remember that.
And he hits him, boop, and then he shoves him, and the Turpin goes spinning across the ring and just drops.
Yeah, like he it was almost like getting clotheslined, like in wrestling. Yeah. Like he whap, like really hits the canvas. I remember for a while actually. God, I don't know, maybe probably like a week or something like that, maybe a little more after Hopkins Trinidad. There were a lot of Trinidad fans who were trying to sell that.
He did do the shove a little bit after he hit him with a shot. He hit him with, I think, another hook or a right hand. Pushed him down.
There were a lot of people who were trying to sell that line that it wasn't a legitimate knockout. He should have gotten extra time because he pushed him down and stuff like that. It was the push that hurt him. That's what hurt him. Like, no, it was the right hand, bro. It was definitely the right hand.
Or if you really want to see the worst one, like a really bad one, when the referee was the blatant one, besides Mills Lane, was when Julio Cesar Green was fighting Lonnie Beasley. Both of them, Green ended up becoming WBA champion for a cup of coffee when he upset William Joppy, and Lonnie Beasley was a fringe contender in the 90s. Anyways, the fight's on USA Tuesday Night Fights. Green is getting a little bit better in like a grueling fight. Referee breaks it up. I forgot who the referee was, but when he breaks it up, Beasley, who was a little weary already to begin with, just kind of stumbles back because the referee broke it kind of hard. Beasley stumbles back and falls down, and the referee walks over and stops the fight. and Green just raises his hand, and Beasley's kind of like, wait, what the hell just happened to me? And he gets wrapped up confused. And yeah.
Yeah, good old Mills Lane.
Down. Yeah, like Mills Lane shoving Hopkins out of the ring and kind of.
Dude. Come on, you guys. Like wrestling and. Oh, dude, brutal. So, that shit was awful. I mean, Mills was, former Marine dude. He was in there.
Mills was in the Olympics too, man. He was not one to mess with. I'm really really close friends with Terry and Tommy Lane. They've told me some awesome stories of like traveling with their dad over the years and going to big fights and meeting all these people. And Mills is couldn't imagine growing up with him. It must have been awesome. But yeah,
Yeah,
not one dude to ever mess with. Why do you think such a small guy who's probably smaller than I was, and I'm not a big guy, was the one that was usually called on to be the referee for major heavyweight fights between absolute gargantuans?
because
Tyson,
he
Holyfield,
was the
Lewis,
quintessential no nonsense referee.
exactly, and didn't take shit from anybody, and it just worked. Like they brought him in to referee Akinwande Lewis. They brought him in to referee other, like sometimes they would bring him into New York to referee a big heavyweight fight. Like
What was it that he had
he refereed, I think Morrison Lewis, which was that in Vegas or was that in Atlantic? One of those areas. I think that was on the East Coast. And
yeah, I want to say it was Atlantic City.
Yeah. So
Yeah, well, he had a couple of good lines in the Holyfield Tyson rematch too. Yeah, bullshit. Shut up. 2 points. You bit him intentionally. Shut up.
That was a bite. No, bullshit.
Yeah, bullshit.
When he pointed. I mean, man, he was Celebrity Deathmatch. That's what my youth usually remembers him by.
So. Yeah, totally, dude. I remember when he got that. He was briefly a TV judge. Like they gave him a TV show for a little bit.
Mills Lane was the man in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, dude, it was Mills Lane every day. It shit was that shit was
90s were a very interesting time, weren't they?
They sure were, dude. I mean, Celebrity Deathmatch? Some of that shit was kind of vile too. It was like,
dude, they remember the one time before we move on, they remember one time they switched up. They took the bodies of Genghis Khan and Gandhi and reversed them and had them fight each other. And like Gandhi went into the audience and just went absolutely wild. Like, how do you air that on television today? Like,
I mean, like, it was like awesome claymation, but still,
and
like,
then they would do that during the Super Bowl commercials, not just during like the halftime show. They had like special celebrity death matches and everything. Shit was crazy.
Yeah, shit was pretty wild, dude.
It was.
Well, we got a wild weekend coming up. We got a couple wild weekends actually, but we got a wild weekend coming up. I mean, I guess I first would say let's talk about Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor. Yes. Man, both of the big fights this weekend are getting some play, dude. Both of them are definitely anticipated. But as far as women's boxing goes, Serrano-Taylor it's pretty far up there as far as notoriety, as far as the quality of
huge.
I don't want to disparage women's boxing, but there has been a lot of catching up that it's been doing, and it's not that like it's a shitty product or something like that. Mm-hmm. It has not been given the proper chance up until the last handful of years. Totally. And I think that's why we're able to say this is that now Serrano-Taylor, we're finally seeing a big women's fight, and not that there haven't been competitive fights before, but on a high level fight, the notoriety that comes with it, etc. So I mean, I think
that has all eyes on it. It's in the big room of MSG. They're headlining on the card of DAZN. Like, this is a big card, one of the biggest cards,
and it's not
everyone's very, very anticipated about.
We talked about this recently too. The Layla Ali, Jackie Frazier lied. You know what I mean? That was considered like a big women's fight when it was novelty act. Like it was all good. Like, it's okay, but that was not.
They give you levels of where it where
that was not this
where it is. Absolutely. So you got Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor, both of them in for years now. It's been a few years that everyone's been clamoring for these two to fight because they've just been circling each other. Katie Taylor has absolutely dominated the lightweight division and solidified herself as the best female fighter in the world, depending on who you ask. The consensus is that she's usually a top at number one, and she's deserved that crown. Former Olympian, she's come in the way she's dominated her competition over the years that she has. And she's not like a major knockout artist or anything, but she's just so good at what she does, man. Precision wise, everything. Well, she's just a consummate pro. And even in the elevated skill level that women's boxing has brought itself to now compared to what we grew up on and how it was over the years, like she's still been able to be a level above one of those guys like we mentioned with Tyson Fury and others that like she can take very good female fighters and just make them look inept because she's so good. And at that point now, like she's had a couple of close calls, some really tough fights. I was ringside for her fight with tell me if I'm pronouncing her name right, Delphine Persoon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So I was there for their fight, and that was one of the best fights I've been ringside for, man. That one was absolute barn burn. Those two beat the hell out of each other. And fights like that, take a little bit out of you. So with that being said, Serrano now is a 7 division champion in boxing, like almost looked upon as like like Pacquiao-ish or any like Henry Armstrong, whatever you want to call it. She's that for female boxing. Like, and not only is it's not like she's going through these divisions, just going the distance with all these, other fighters. Like she's blowing everyone out that she fights. Even if she goes the distance, she still like, wins a complete shutout or just like, loses one round or so. Like she's just a dominant champion. And she's come a long way. I think when she first came on the scene, she was signed by a fledgling company in the mid 2000s called Boxing 360, which was based out of New York. And at that point, you would just see her on flyers around the city and other stuff like that. But she was making a name for herself. I was reading about her on Fight News and Boxing Talk because Boxing Talk and Boxing 360 had like some kind of deal going on or whatever. So, her name was out there, but it wasn't really known, especially women's boxing still. We're talking like at this point, 2008, 2009, 2010, around back then, like there's still that whole era. It's a whole different time compared to where women's boxing is now, correct? So totally. And it took a while for her, but she kept on winning. She did lose one fight, but that didn't deter her. And every time she won, she was just blasting other, fighters out. And for her to be able to bring that point to where she is now and make a lot of history, man, both of these women have brought this to like everybody in the boxing world who now accept women's boxing more so than any other time in history. And the way the world is now in accepting female sports and how women are accepted in general in the overall spectrum, this is huge. This is really huge for them, and I'm really, really excited and proud and happy for them.
Yeah, Katie Taylor is, in terms of popularity, really huge in Ireland.
Huge. I talked to people at my job who are from Ireland. A few people from my job from Ireland who are not really fight fans in general, but they know everything about her and they're really excited about this weekend.
Yeah, there a number of Irish folks refer to her as our Katie because she's very popular there. Boxing is experiencing, well, it's slightly complicated. We talked about the Daniel Kinahan situation a couple shows ago, and that has certainly complicated Irish boxing's rise in terms of local popularity and in terms of success and stuff like that. That has definitely put something of a damper on it. But even with that, and even trying to fight some of the things that have gone on the amateur level, especially on the, amateur boxing right now is kind of it's in a very funky spot. They're trying to figure out even whether or not boxing is going to remain as an Olympic sport. I mean, they've been doing that for years. Like that comes up every couple of years, but regardless,
amateur boxing has been absolutely corrupt for how long? I mean,
it's not in a good spot. It hasn't been
over 30 years since Roy Jones got blatantly robbed and the corruption was shown live on television.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and they've been struggling trying to change this thing or that thing ever since, and it's pretty much every games they've changed this or they've changed that in an effort to do this. New
persons in charge and promises X, Y, and Z.
It's bad news.
It's not as corrupt as the pro game.
No, I mean so it's bad news between Mick Conlon. Everybody remembers the double birds that he flipped to the judges when he lost his decision. But to bring it back around, despite all of these things, Irish boxing has had to endure a number of these kind of hardships. And Katie Taylor, that is, has been able to kind of cut through a lot of that din, a lot of that noise, and has been able to really endear herself to a lot of Irish boxing fans, and specifically women and young girls. There's been a massive surge in Ireland of women's boxing and young women getting into boxing clubs all over. So that doesn't make her a good fighter necessarily, but just to talk about the inspiration and to talk about how she makes people feel locally. That's important. That's not going to necessarily be with her per se during the fight, but that is important, and it's important to the sport. It's important to women's boxing. And now, of course, she was a like 2 or 3 time AIBA world champion. Like you said, she was an Olympian. She has a lot of experience on the amateur level. She only has something like 20 fights, not a big knockout puncher, like you said. But that being said, Amanda Serrano is not a real big knockout puncher herself.
No,
And
she's an accumulative. Yeah.
yeah, she's more like of a kind of beat you down type of fighter, or outdo you,
She
outwork
throws
you.
a lot of punches.
She throws a lot of punches, and she's tricky. The downfall to the way she fights, I think, is that because she doesn't have a lot of power, she's there to be hit sometimes, and sometimes she absorbs, some
You're
punches.
talking
But
Katie Taylor?
well, actually, both of them, to
Oh,
be
yeah.
honest. I mean, both of them kind of, because of that lack of power, are having to kind of outwork opponents, get in there and do some work, which leaves them there to be hit. So this is probably going to be, I would imagine, a fight that's tactical with some really nice moments of like exchanges and stuff like that.
Oh,
I mean,
man, I mean, their styles, you can see by how they both fight, they're going to mesh very, very well. And
they both get in there.
yeah, and they not only that, like they both know this is the biggest fight. This is not only the biggest fight of their career. This is this at this point right now. This is probably the biggest fight in women's boxing history when you put it on the pedestal and everything around it. So yeah, this is. I think we're gonna get their A game from both of them, man. And again, dude, this is like considering where this has come from when women's boxing was first really featured on television in the days of Christy Martin in the 90s, when it was cool to see Christy Martin, but she was just fighting a girl who or Deirdre Gordy or Lucia Riker or the handful of other female fighters who were legit fighters back then, Jane Couch, Bonnie Canino, and Andrea Deschamps. There's a few others, but like just giving throwing out a few names out there. But they would fight the most inept people you would ever see. Like they had no business whatsoever being.
Yeah, there was no opposition.
No opposition. You
None.
can tell that this was a record completely made up too, that they're throwing into. Oh, a person was 4-1. They've been inactive for 3 years, and then they'll be put on Showtime television.
But then you'd see them, and they look like they'd never even thrown a punch.
Never thrown a punch in their life. Maybe on the street when they got whooped up too, because they have no idea what they're doing. And someone like Christy Martin or Deirdre Gogarty was just knocking their head into the bleachers. And thank God we've come to that point, because that's what was featured then. Or Bob Arum in his freak show undercards, when he would feature Mia St. John and Butterbean over and over and over, because he knew that's what would sell to for a De La Hoya fight or whatever it was that he was trying to sell. It's so important now that we have this thing that they've been able to come from the points of that era. Which, don't get me wrong, those are the pioneers of the sport. Even more so when you mentioned like Lady Tiger, Tremere, who's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame and stuff like that. Jackie Tonda-Wanda, who has a lot of controversy behind her, but she has a name nonetheless, and so on. So to come from all of that into where we are now, where this is headlining an event, that's huge, huge, huge. And there's a lot going. There's a lot. Sport is as healthy as it's ever been for women's boxing. Like I said, you have this big fight coming up this weekend. You have Michaela Mayer, you have Clarissa Shields, you have Savannah Marshall, you have Alicia Baumgartner. Like, sport's very healthy right now. All these women fighters are featured prominently on television. All of them are world champions. All of them are getting very popular. They have Twitter. They have other outlets that they get to share their talent and their outlooks and different things. And there's a lot of fights because of all the back and forth that are going on that everyone's very, very excited about and like kind of salivating now, which has never happened for women's boxing before. Like, you had the date that, if you really want to go way back, people were excited and hoping to see Ann Wolfe, who was an absolute monster in her time, fight Layla Ali. But it never even came close. Or Lucia Riker fighting Christy Martin. But the publicity, the demand, X, Y, and Z was never even close to what it is now for these type of fights. And that's awesome. So it's like growing a lot.
there's still a lot of work to be done, obviously. And I mean, this discussion is ongoing. Women need to be paid more. Period.
Yes, yes,
They
totally.
need to be paid more. They
And
need to be
that's where it comes to like the whole like 3 minute rounds or 2 minute rounds. I agree with the ones who say if you want to give me 3 minute rounds, then pay us more.
well, and that's fine. You know, like they just should be paid more. Period. And
Totally.
it should be treated as if it's the same sport, more or less. So I don't really see why. Well, I do see why, but point is, there's still a lot of work to do in terms of creating more equity and equality in women's boxing compared to men's boxing. But this is a very big step, and I gotta ask too, what do you think is going to happen?
You know, it's a tough fight, but I'm gonna say I think Katie Taylor has lost a slight step. I mean, I still think she's a top level fighter, but I think she's slowed down a little bit over the years. Like I said, she had an extensive amateur career. She's been undefeated and over her career, but she's had a few tough fights, like the Pursoon fight and a few others. So like, it seems like she's slowing down a little bit. I think Serrano hasn't had as much wear and tear on her career, and her style combined with everything else, I think she might be able to pull this out. But I don't know. It's one of those really, really such like a back and forth 50-50 fight that, it's going to be close either way. But I think I'm leaning towards Serrano.
I think that
Going
if
the
you
distance.
I agree with you. I think that you have yeah, dude. I think that that's a pretty good breakdown. I think that Katie Taylor's got two things going against her. One, oh my God, her voice, bro. I'm sorry, but her voice is it's Peter Brady. Oh my God, it's so bad. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me. And I mean, bro, I have a lot of Irish family. So it's not the accent, like, oh, it's just how Irish people talk. No, it's not, bro. She's got a very warbly voice. God bless her. But that's one strike against her. No, but the actual in-ring strike is that I think that she's definitely got less experience. And then the kind of the other edge of that, and you brought it up too, is that she's had a handful of pretty difficult fights that I think showed where her ceiling is, that I think showed that she's really struggling against Natasha Jonas at times. She was really struggling against Delphine Pursoon. And don't get me wrong, because Delphine Pursoon definitely took the fight to her and fought hard. And so it wasn't like she was struggling against some scrub or something like that. But even so, I think that those kinds of fights showed that we have seen the maximum. We've seen kind of where she's at. Whereas with Amanda Serrano, we've seen a bunch of different gears. We've seen a couple more facets to her game than we've seen from Katie Taylor. And I would imagine that Amanda Serrano's her experience, and I think that her style is just a little bit more refined. It's a little sharper, a little bit. She moves a little bit better, I think. And I think we're going to see that kind of stuff. Of course, the strike against Amanda Serrano is that like the trainer is yeah, the trainer's a funky guy. But no,
Yeah.
but needless to say, it's a really good fight. It's a good matchup, and I think that you got it spot on here, dude. I think Amanda Serrano's got the edge.
Didn't Katie Taylor fight Serrano's sister?
Of course, I looked back on her record, but I want to say
I
that
want
she
to say
fought
she
Cindy
did.
Serrano. Yeah,
Yeah, and like just want like a shutout, so she also has that
there we
perspective.
go. Yeah, okay. Yep, you're right. And yes, it was a shutout. And so yeah, so there's a little bit of extra oomph going into
Yeah,
for Amanda
yeah,
Serrano for that get back too.
totally. So
It's gonna be that Klitschko
I'm looking forward
situation
to it,
where
man. It's
Vitaly
gonna be
sails
a
in.
it's gonna be a good fight, and it's a fight that like the Garden is gonna be is the consent. Everyone around here, there's been like a excitement in New York City for this fight. There's like been an air for it, and I'm sure the Garden's gonna be very very packed that night. I might be there myself.
It would be pretty cool to see Amanda Serrano have the same effect locally, like in New York, for instance, as Katie Taylor has had in Ireland.
Nah, man, there's gonna be Jimmy's Corner is definitely gonna be packed this week, all for for this fight. So if that's an indication of anything, like I said, I expect the Garden to be very, very lively and pack that as well, because this is a fight that has been anticipated. They both have big fan bases. Serrano coming to New York, Katie Taylor bringing in her contingent as well, and a lot of fans coming in to support her. So yeah, man, this is gonna be big. And what's awesome about this is that the fight that we're about to mention after this and this fight are not going to cross paths. So we can, boxing
Thank
fans can enjoy
goodness.
everything. Thank God, because
Thank
usually
goodness, dude.
every all these networks love to kind of program each other and run the main events concurrently and just kind of piss everyone off. And it really sucks being a boxing fan sometimes. Like it's a great to be in one, but you have to suffer through a lot of ways and have
Well, that
multiple
type of shit is
televisions.
needless. I don't
It is. It's just
understand it.
petty shit.
Well, and you know what's
It's not
crazy
make me
too?
think that like 1 a.m. over here because I live on the East Coast and enough is enough, dude. I'm 37. I can't be staying up like this anymore.
Well, another really cool thing, real quickly, about this Serrano-Taylor fight is that it's headlining, and I
Yeah.
mean, this is a slightly different conversation, obviously, and I do have to give props to Jake Paul because he has kind of taken this on as a sort of project that he wanted to get this fight out there and help make it huge. And I think it would have
And
been a big fight. It would have been a big fight without Jake Paul. So I don't want to give him like all the credit per se, but he definitely took it on as a project and helped push it out there. So I got to give him some props. I got to give him some credit for that. And the fact that it's a headlining fight and it's not a support bout for some bigger fight or something like that that's important. That's sending a serious message.
I totally agree, man. Like, say what you want excuse me, say what you want about the Paul brothers and their personality and what they go on with and stuff like that. But like you just mentioned, he is since he's taken on Amanda Serrano as like an advisor, manager, promoter, whatever. He's done huge things. Like he's really, really put her out there, and his presence was a big part of how this fight got made and working with it, stuff like that. So it's genuine too. It's not like he's trying to put on an act or anything. Like he really wanted to see women's boxing, try to put on a different platform and for them to make more money. And this is the biggest fight with the most attention that the sport has had so far. So kudos to him for that. Like I said, say what you want because they have a very polarizing personality with some of their antics or whatever, but you can't say that, he doesn't care about women's boxing, and that's awesome.
Totally. Yeah, and it's good to see a fight like that get, come to the forefront. And
Totally. And it's a fight that's been, that people have wanted to be made for a long time. This isn't one that just like happened recently with what, with both women just kind of like coming together. Like this has been, if you want to put it in a certain way, this is almost like women's boxing's Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford. For a few years, it's been brewing. Everyone's been asking, hoping that they were going to like finally cross paths. When's it going to be made? There was a few rumors that was getting close, and then it'll fall apart, and then eventually now here we are. So that's how I look at it.
I think that's a pretty good analogy, dude. Especially from in terms of like the levels, the
Yes. Yeah.
anticipation and two high level fighters. I wish that
You
there
have
were.
two of the best female fighters on the absolute planet.
If
In the same era, in the same division, at the both of them, not gonna say at their absolute peaks, but close enough where they're finally gonna clash. And here we are. So
Yeah, it's really yeah, it's the kind of stuff that we should be expecting for. But you kind of alluded to that earlier that I think Jake Paul key in this situation, like the reason why he was important to making this fight, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, was that there's just has not been the money, there's not been the demand to
yeah.
put together big fights. And I mean, like, what winds up happening, or what has happened in the past, is that they wind up going to women for like these bigger matchups or like for these higher profile matchups, and then they're like, oh, how about like a $50,000 or whatever, and they're like, the fuck are you talking about? So there hasn't really, at least in the minds of promoters or whoever it is that's putting together the money for these matchups, there hasn't been money for the matchups, and they can't put them together. And so I think that that's really where Jake Paul has been instrumental, is changing the conversation of like, I know that he annoys a lot of boxing fans, and that they don't like the fact that he's eased into boxing the way that he has. But he's also kind of opened up the conversation. A lot of people focus on the UFC shit because he always snipes at Dana White, but he has definitely changed the conversation, or the trajectory of the conversation, when it comes to fighter pay and the possibilities of fighter pay. Because I know I don't want to get too far into it because this is an entire podcast unto itself, but it's just like the entertainment industry. You have a manager or whatever, and you cut them X%. And when you're a fighter and you have a manager or a promoter or an advisor, you're cutting them X%. And the more people that you have, the more percentages you're cutting them. And that's why you hear about fighters who are making 250 grand and then they walk home with like 60 grand or something like that, because they're fucking, after taxes and after paying out all their team and all training expenses and blah, 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 I don't have shit. And so Jake Paul, what he is helping to do, and this is kind of the Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor thing, is an extension of this conversation, is changing the dynamic, kind of like how Floyd Mayweather did, to say like, you guys don't need to be paying out all these promoters and all this type of shit. Like, they're making all the money. What the fuck? Pocket the money yourself. And that's kind of in part what this is about too.
Absolutely. And anything that puts more focus on women's boxing, which is basically, this is the biggest one that they're going to have at this point, and that they're going to get the maximum amount of money that they absolutely deserve, then kudos to them, because this is just the start of it. Once this fight happens, this could be like a good win, as you know, Rick Elvis Parker once said, the windfall factor. This could be for women's boxing. Like, after this fight, and if it gets if it delivers the way it should, then I think subsequent big fights after that will get the proper payout that they deserve. Well, I hope so, at least.
Right. Like, hopefully it's some sort of kind of domino effect.
Yeah,
You know,
because after this fight, the next one that everyone is looking forward to is the grudge match between Savannah Marshall and Clarissa Shields, which goes all the way back to their amateur career.
Yep.
So that's a big one I'm looking forward to too. So I mean, it's
yeah. Well, and I was going to say that if there's one thing that this Serrano-Taylor matchup is kind of lacking, is the idea that there's going to be a big knockout, because it's highly unlikely both of them being
not at this skill and everything like that. And like you mentioned too, neither one of them are one punch knockout artists. Serrano usually overwhelms her opponents, and Taylor, the majority of the time goes to do a decision, unless she's so overwhelmingly over her opponent that she stops him, within a few rounds. But this fight's going the distance, and I think it's going to be a close fight.
And I think that, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that, like you brought up, Clarissa Shields versus Savannah Marshall, and that's the kind of fight where that could be different, because Savannah Marshall's obviously a puncher, and she's the last person to have defeated, to have defeated Clarissa Shields. So again, that's
an accent too, man. The way she was calling her pillow fist,
dude. I mean, it's just pretty hilarious, and I'm excited to see a matchup like that myself. So this opens, hopefully,
because Shields is a big shit talker, and Marshall has been shit talking her back, and you can tell she's very confident in fighting Shields and what she can do to her. So that's a fight I'm really looking forward to, because I think there will be a knockout in that fight potentially, or someone's going to get hurt.
Something's going to happen. Somebody's going to get the shit punched out of them. That's for sure.
Like, Taylor Serrano is going to have a high level of punches thrown. It's going to be a brutal fight. Both women are going to, definitely inflict some punishment on themselves. But for whatever reason, this grudge fight between Marshall and Shields, and the way they just kind of, you could tell they really don't like each other, as opposed to whenever, whenever there's a grudge match, when two people really don't like each other.
Totally.
As opposed to like more respectfulness, as you've seen with Serrano and Taylor. It's just,
or if it's manufactured drama, where it's not real, that happens. It's
totally not real with either one of them. And there's no drama there. They're both very respectful. Both of them are kind of mellow. And like you said, Katie Taylor is very reserved and just kind of respectful of everybody, as is Serrano. So they're just more so taking this and like knowing that they're putting women's boxing at the highest level that they can and giving it the most attention it's ever got, as opposed to Shields and Savannah Marshall, where they just hate each other. There's no business. Shields thinks she's the greatest woman of all time. Marshall thinks she's a chump, that she's going to stop her in a few rounds. And she already has like you said, she beat her in the amateurs, the last person to ever beat her and the only person to have beaten her. So there's like an added incentive there. Yeah, man, this women's boxing is awesome right now.
Yeah, that's really the only thing, unfortunately, lacking in this fight. But that's not a big deal to me, and it should be a great fight. But
yeah, totally. I'm looking forward to it. Saturday's going to be good for that.
And so for this other big matchup this weekend, Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez. I mean, I think that a knockout is far more likely in this fight, and so for that reason, I think that there's a little bit of excitement here too. There's a number of different kind of like outside storylines for both fighters. There's no real history, but this is I don't know that I would call it really the definition of a crossroads matchup,
I
But
don't
it
think it's a crossroads fight.
but it is the kind of fight, I think, though, where at this moment in their careers,
Mhm.
both guys do kind of need this win. I mean, I guess that's kind of stupid to say because they always need a fucking win, like a fighter can't lose. But I mean, with Oscar Valdez, he very badly feels as though coming off the ropes in Conceição fight, and then also coming off of having tested positive for performance enhancing drugs. I think that he feels really motivated, that he needs a really big showing here. A lot of the stuff in his career has been called into question over the last year or two. And then Shakur Stevenson, I think that he has also kind of on the flip side been underestimated and kind of undersold a little bit. I mean, in a number of ways for a good reason. A lot of people remember him as the kid who was crying on TV after the Olympics, and
I
then
remember that.
I mean, and that's an easy thing to make fun of. A number of other people remember that he's the kid who was in the auto garage trying to beat up people in a brawl. Again, another easy thing that's like, you can pick on him for that kind of shit, and it's easy thing to kind of call back to on social media. But
Mhm.
these kinds of things, right or wrong, have come to kind of like define him, and I think that he is really on the lookout to score a big win, and this would be a massive win for him if he could beat Oscar Valdez. So there's a lot of motivation for both of these guys to score a win here.
Well, the thing about Shakur Stevenson is that he's supremely confident in himself. Like he carries himself to a certain degree that he like knows that he feels that he's an elite fighter. If you ask him, he'll put himself in the top 5 pound. Well, someone asked him recently who was his top 5 pound for pound, and he gave it. And he said if he beats Valdez this weekend, or he said when he beats Valdez this weekend, then he'll put himself in there as well. And the one thing that I saw on Twitter and a few other people talking, a lot of people were trying to compare this fight. Well, not everybody, but a few people were trying to compare this fight to, say, Floyd Diego Corrales. And I'm not sure if I would compare that or think that is even a fair comparison because, like, I think Oscar Valdez has more levels and to his game
That's
than
true. Yeah.
Corrales. And
Yeah.
not only that, Shakur Stevenson wasn't the type of fighter that Floyd Mayweather was at junior lightweight back then. Floyd,
I know he
Pretty Boy
feels he is, but he's
Yeah,
not.
he's not. Pretty Boy Mayweather and Money Mayweather were two entirely different fighters. Not to say that Pretty Boy Mayweather went out there and was ferociously knocking out guys like Mike Tyson, but he was a much more aggressive fighter in his early days and in terms of how he attacked and when he had a guy hurt and yada yada yada. You know what I mean? Shakur Stevenson is not that. What he is one of the best defensive fighters on the planet. And if you look at his CompuBox numbers, he ranks at near the very top in terms of guys who doesn't get hit at all in a fight. And his accuracy is uncanny as well. He has a very good radar for punches, and he's clearly a classic boxer who's been born and bred since he was a kid. Like he was born into the sport, been bred into the sport, brought up young, and all the way up to the Olympics. I think he had one of those records that again he hadn't lost a fight in a number of years, and it was an upset when he didn't win the gold medal. So, like you mentioned, when you alluded to when he was crying, and a lot of people were looking at him in a certain light because he was still a kid, and he turned pro, and he wasn't turning the world on fire in his first year and a half or so because he was still young. He was still growing. He was still growing into his man strengths, so to speak, and still developing as a pro because the pro and amateurs are two entirely different sports. And even though he was an elite amateur, and that would translate a little bit into the pros, he was still adjusting a little bit. But soon enough, you started seeing little things, and then like one day he scored a first round knockout over an opponent who I believe it was that like went the distance with Lee Selby or somebody that was known as a durable guy, but like Stevenson just like annihilated him. And that started getting people's attention because at that point he was still a prospect, he was still an elite prospect who was featured on top rank undercards, but no one was really excited about him. They're like, oh yeah, this feather fist young Stevenson just gonna, go to 80-72 against another opponent. But once he blew out this other guy in the first round, whose name again I forgive me at the moment, but like people started taking notice from there, and then he started getting matched up more tough. Like I remember, I think he fought Christopher Diaz on a top rank, on a pay-per-view undercard, completely shut him out. Started fighting more and more competition, and started looking like he started growing. Just like his body was like developing more. Looked like he was just filling out more, and like just starting adjusting better into the pro ranks. As opposed to being an amateur, he started really like, taking his style and adjusting it and just really, really blossoming. And it got to the point where he is now, man. He's looked upon, even though he hasn't had that many pro fights, but he's an elite talent. And most people look upon him as being the future pound for pound great and one of the best in the world in a few years. So even though this is a unification fight, Oscar Valdez has been around a long time. A lot of people I've noticed are thinking this is like a coronation for Stevenson. I'm not sure if it's going to be that easy for him. Even though Valdez has been around a long time, I mean, back to the point where he was featured on HBO, so that gives you a perspective of how long ago this was. And this was a couple of years before HBO was even going out of business. Like this was when he was still like a prospect, and he was still being featured on like either pay-per-view undercards or even on an HBO undercard. So he's been around for a minute, and he's had some grueling fights. The Scott Quigg fight where he had his jaw broken and went through hell and back to win that fight. The fight that you mentioned as well, and a few other ones. Like that's his style. Like he's a cagey fighter. He knows how to box, and he's a former Olympian, and he's a very, very good boxer himself. But he's a guy that likes to get in there, man. He throws a bunch of punches. He's very aggressive, and as opposed to this being, so to sum it up, as opposed to this being Floyd Corrales, I could see this maybe being Floyd Castillo.
I think that's probably a closer analogy. Yeah. I mean, well, even just style wise, Diego Corrales was more like a stalker
He
kind of
was.
like.
He was a stalker guy. He didn't move a lot. He was very, very tall. He never moved his head or anything. Like he had boxing ability, but he wasn't a guy that had quick feet. He had to set his punches. Like he was tailor-made for Floyd when it really came down to it. The reason why everybody thought back then that Floyd might have trouble losing that fight was because of all of his out-of-the-ring issues that he was going through. He had a lot of controversy with his girlfriends and other stuff and yada, yada, yada. And Corrales was destroying dudes at that point. Remember Derek Gainer and this one and that one. And he was
Freddie,
Freddie, man, just stomping guys out like they were bugs. And Floyd put on his best performance, but then when you watched it too, man, Corrales had no chance in that fight. He just walked forward. Floyd came out, boop, 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 boop.
Yeah, I mean, you can't it's like that kind of style, dude. If you're not going to move your head and
not do anything,
Floyd is just going to fucking knock your block off, and that's what he did. And it probably also
like that.
It probably didn't help that just Corrales, I think, was struggling to make 130 pounds.
And I think he had some out of the ring issues going on.
Yeah, he also had out of the ring shit. But
Floyd infamously said he was dedicating this fight to all the battered women out there,
which is just the height of absolute comedy.
Calling the kettle black, right?
Jesus Christ, but yeah, I think that you're probably spot on though, dude, because Oscar Valdez is a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more able to adjust, a little bit more.
And he's from the Reynoso camp. Is he still working? He's still working with him, right? Like, or did he leave them?
That's a good question, because you know what? I watched the what is it called? Blood, Sweat, and Tears. It was a 2-part thing that Top Rank did for this fight and they put it out on YouTube, and I watched it on YouTube. I don't really remember seeing Reynoso much like featured in there. At least
I'm not sure. I haven't really kept up, so I wasn't entirely sure.
That's actually a good question. They talked about his positive test, but I don't know. Damn, now I want to know. Now I should look. But in any case, I think that it's important that if he were in that camp, that's a really high level camp to be in. And so, I mean, for that level, I think for his sake, I hope he's still in that camp, because that's the kind of camp I think that you would learn and grow from. But
he's gonna push Stevenson. That's what Stevenson needs, is that a lot of his fights, he ends up, and this is the quality of a potentially great fighter who Stevenson right now is very, very good. He's not great yet, but they make the fight, their pace. Like quickly, right away, they just take control over it and just make it their pace that they want to be. And Stevenson does that quickly. Like he makes guys just completely miss, and to the point that they're almost afraid to really throw on him like that. And then he just kind of controls them from there. And Valdez isn't the type of guy that gets deterred really quick if he gets hit with a couple of shots. He's going to keep on going. And I need to see how Stevenson's going to react to that. I think he's going to bring it to the next level, because I think he has the potential. And skill-wise, he totally does. But, I think, that's what he needs. He needs someone that's going to have to push him to that.
And so I looked real quick just to make sure, just so we don't look like total fucking idiots here. But yeah, Eddie Reynoso is still in Oscar Valdez camp, and
Okay.
or at least that's what it looks like. And so, I mean, that's my guess is that they probably didn't feature it much because Canelo's probably the focus right now for Reynoso because he's got the Bivol fight coming up next week. But yeah, I think that that's a really good point too, because Shakur Stevenson is not a knockout puncher. Like overall, he's not a big puncher. He's a sharp puncher. He's a very sharp fighter, the kind of fighter who's going to outspeed you, frustrate you, like you said.
It's very accurate.
Yeah, the kind of fighter who's like, you go to hit him and he's not there, and then he stings the shit out of you with something that you didn't see. So I mean, not the kind of guy where you're going to have to be worrying about his punching power per se, but in that kind of fight, a guy like Oscar Valdez who's not going to be deterred or frustrated, that's important.
Totally. And Valdez is a guy that throws a high level of punches himself. And he's not a person that just kind of wails away. I mean, if he gets you on the ropes, he's going to throw a little bit. But like you said, he's pretty cerebral in his approach. He's not just like a balls to the wall throwing out there trying to anger. Like he moves in, he knows he knows where he's going to place his punches, and he uses a jab well as well. And if he's with the Reynoso's camp, you're going to have a good game plan for Stevenson. They're not going to go in there trying to think for themselves of just out of clue or what they're going to do, kind of wing it. Like they're going to come in with a very steady game plan. And speaking of, now that I think of it, there was a boxing scene article where Canelo said he was surprised of how much of an underdog Valdez was in the fight. So there you have it.
Yeah,
and I'm sure being in camp with Canelo, as Canelo gets ready for his fight with Bivol, definitely gets Valdez added motivation himself. Like they're both training for big fights. You know what I mean?
I would imagine, yeah, because I mean, it's kind of like how they say, go ahead.
Oh, it's the Junior Jones factor. For instance, Junior Jones was training in camp with Evander Holyfield as Holyfield was getting ready for Tyson, and Junior Jones was getting ready for Marco Antonio Pereira. And Junior Jones said afterwards, after he upset Pereira, that he said that being in camp with Holyfield, working with Tommy Brooks and such, gave him that extra motivation. So it does help.
It's almost like the idea that they say, what do they say? When you win a championship, you become 30% better, or whatever the saying is. I think that it's a similar kind of idea that like the greatness is kind of by osmosis pouring onto you. You're working out in the same camp as Canelo and etc. So I mean that doesn't make Oscar Valdez great, obviously, but I think that it's definitely helpful.
Just gives you that gives you some added motivation, some
for
juice
sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's a really high level fight. What do you think is going to happen, dude?
I mean, I'd love to say that I would pull an upset, but I can't quite see it. I think Shakur Stevenson, even though he hasn't been tested yet, I think he has the potential. And the way he looks and out of all the guys right now, Devin Haney, and all the other young guns of that group, I think Stevenson has the best look of them at this moment. So I think he's going to win this fight, but I do not think it's going to be as easy as say some others thought it's going to be Floyd Corrales or Floyd or Toro Gotti or something like that. I mean, I think he's going to be pushed. I think he's going to struggle a little bit, and he's going to have to come out of, a couple of situations, but I think he should prevail at the end.
Yeah, I think Shakur Stevenson's probably going to pull off a decision would be my guess.
If he wins a complete shutout, or if he wins 10-2 or 11-1 or something like that, I'll be highly impressed and already consider him, put him on the pedestal to shoot him to the moon at that point.
130 to 140 right now. I'm kind of creeping into 140, but that's mostly because the lightweights are wanting to move up. But the 130, 135 right now is hot. And so I think that this is a moment here, right? Where we have Shakur Stevenson, or the winner of this fight, I should say. The winner of this fight is poised for bigger things for sure, potentially at lightweight. So
I mean, they're up for grabs is the ring title, isn't it, for this fight? Or just basically lineal championship, undisputed. Everyone's kind of looking at it as the man.
Well, they're technically going to be, unifying two world titles. So I mean, take that for whatever it's worth these days. I mean, it's tough to assign exactly how much worth that is, but it's important, and that's, I guess, the best way we have in order to kind of determine who's the best in a given division. So yeah, I'd have to look. To be honest, I don't know if it's for the ring title, but if it were, that would make sense to me. I wouldn't be mad about it or be like, oh, what the shit. It makes sense. So, and clearly, regardless of that, whoever wins this fight, especially if it's emphatic, especially if it's like by knockout, man, they got the world is their oyster at 130 pounds right now, and they potentially could move up for 135 pound. That's big. 135-pound fight. That's big.
I mean, I think that's what they would probably do. What would they still be doing at 130? Jojo Diaz alluded that he's going to move down, but that's definitely not something to keep someone busy in terms of money when they can be chasing the Haney Kambosos winner or Tank Davis or Ryan Garcia, Lomachenko, if he ever, when his conflict in the Ukraine ends eventually, and so on. So
yeah, man, it's there's a lot of potential excitement to come from
so much. These guys just need to start fighting each other. I mean, we got Haney and Kambosos fighting pretty soon, and that's a start, and that's a fight I'm excited about. Haney's looking, from the photos I've been seeing posted of him, he's looking in incredible shape. Kambosos, I'm sure, is in incredible shape himself. That's going to be a high level fight. That's going to be awesome. It will provide a lot of clarity in the division. And then, Tank Davis, who, did you see the interview actually? Let me ask you that, where someone asked him, who do you want to fight? Someone like Preston, they said, who do you want to fight in, like, in the future, and in terms of like the top names or whatever. And he said, I don't really know. And they were like, have you ever called out this one, that one, whatever? He said, no. He said, actually, I've never really done that in my career. And that kind of shows you how it is being like, under like an umbrella with TMT and other stuff, right?
Well, and I mean, I think
he was being honest about it. It wasn't like almost being shady. He was being honest. He was like, I've just never really called anyone. He was like, I've never called these guys out. No.
Well, and I mean, he doesn't really need to, because he's already in the position where they want to fight him. And I mean,
yeah.
How do I carefully say this? I mean, I think that I personally think he's a very good and talented fighter. He's obviously a troubled dude who has a difficult time keeping himself out of trouble. And hey, man, I can relate, but I think that a lot of it is that it's showing what happens when you have really intelligent promoters behind you, good advisors, and people who are willing to kind of show you the ropes, and also people who are willing to beat the drums for you, like, relentlessly, where it's like, regardless of what the fuck is going on, you're a star, dude. And if somebody's going to question it, fuck them. You know what I mean? Like, aggressively tell them you're a star, and don't say no, and don't fucking buy anything about how you're not. And, obviously the component is there that he's talented and that he has a lot of skill. If you don't have that, then you can't fucking push the star angle. Then you wind up with like the dude you mentioned, the Welsh Mayweather, Lee Selby, like it doesn't work. You don't wind up in a good place. But I think that obviously we can see with Tank Davis that he's got a lot more ability and talent, and that he could.
I mean, now that he's not with Floyd or whatever's going on with that,
I don't know.
That he could be available now maybe for other fights, but who knows? Maybe because since he was under that umbrella for so long, that like it's hard to say. He's more of the wild card. And like, for instance, back in the day, Ring Magazine, when I was a fan back, early days, they had an article of division by division the fights they wanted to see, and then they had a percentage of the chances of each fight happening, like, through the division. Some of them was like 90%, and those fights that actually did happening. Others were like 20%, and just like the 20%, the fights never even came close to being sniffed like that. And it almost feels like the fights with Tank Davis, maybe except for the exception of Ryan Garcia, because of like the profiles of both of them and their history, that fight could potentially be made. It's going to be tough for him to be made with those other guys, just because of like the money wise profile, the whole who's the A, who's the B side, who deserves this and all that. It's just going to be really, really, really tough.
It complicates the conversation for sure.
It does. That's what, and that's kind of like the whole story with everything in boxing. who's going to be the A side money wise, who's going to get this, who's going to get that. Everything falls apart because of money.
Well, and I think that there's also that kind of that portion of it too, where, and again, I don't want to say this in a way where I'm disparaging this line of thinking, because I think that it's an important conversation to have, where in the last handful of years, like for instance, Floyd Mayweather, I talked about this earlier with the Jake Paul thing, where how he's kind of moving the zeitgeist or conversation about boxing. But similarly, I think that there have been a lot of fighters, especially under like the Premier Boxing Champions umbrella,
Yeah.
where they're trying to impart the mindset of these fighters where, like, dude, you don't need to go out and get the shit kicked out of you. You don't need to fight a war every single time, where, you know, like there are ways to maneuver you as a fighter so that you don't take as much damage, so that you're able to win world titles or become a multiple division champion, but not have to like run the gauntlet type of thing.
Exactly.
And I know that there are going to be a lot of old school fight fans who see that mindset and they go like, yeah, what a bunch of pussies. You know, what a bunch of weaklings. Oh my God, you know, back in World War II, can you know, of course, like we know all this shit. We get it. We know how difficult shit was back then. But the point is that, like,
people are already doing it for the 90s, man.
Well, and look at how these fighters ended up. That's the whole point, is that like we can't simultaneously go, oh my God, you know, this is so bad. I feel so bad for these fighters, but then like have fucking bloodlust in our eyes and be like, I want that fucking war and I want them to kill each other.
Floyd says that all the time because he mentions what happened to his Uncle Roger and even to his dad to a degree.
And you can't do both.
Roy Jones, who, like, Joe McClellan was his friend, even though they fought in the amateurs, and look what happened to him in his fight with Nacho Ben. That really, really impacted Roy. Even though Roy continued a lot longer than anyone ever anticipated.
Right, because he fell victim to it just like every fighter. Yeah,
he really did. But like, yeah, man, it's, if you watch, like, especially with this era now, because with now knowing what we know about CTE and like brain damage and boxing and what's going on, and like the books like Tris Dixon's like really, really great book that just came out recently, and others, just, you know, doctors and all this stuff that's come out over the years now about what the cumulative effect of a long career can do for, you know, our brain and everything like that. You know, a lot of these fighters today are saying, why would I risk anything like that? That's the whole effect now.
And that's the whole thing, is that like, should we blame them? And really the answer should be no, dude, we shouldn't. We should encourage, like, I'm not saying that we need to cheerlead fighters to the point where like we're patting them on the ass for not taking challenges. But there's a big difference. There's a big gulf between that and absolutely just putting them in the fucking thresher. You know, like there's ways to maneuver fighters that's far more. I mean,
there's you know, fighters want to chase greatness, and if you want to do that, you have to go through hell sometimes to be able to get that. And there's other ones that are just going to completely milk the system, but to the point where it's almost laughable, and you're like, you know what, you got to do something, like, that's pathetic. But
right, there's a bunch of levels here.
There's some fighters find a balance though, and
exactly.
Tank almost seems like he's found that. Tank at this moment seems like he's found that balance, because he has been in a few tough fights. Like Isaac Cruz was a bad motherfucker who gave him the hell and back. You know what I mean?
And PBC is very intelligently pivoting Isaac Cruz from that fight and the success from that fight into like, oh, do it. We got this other dude now. So
yeah. So
you know, yeah,
I think Tank's at that balance at that point. But that being said, I hope that he doesn't have the mindset where, oh, if it happens, it happens. I'm just going to let them deal with it. I fight whoever they put me in front of, instead of just like, hey, man, I want to fight Haney. I want to fight Kambosos. I want to fight Ryan Garcia. I want to fight Teofimo and move up eventually. Like, so he already went to 140, even though he's a tiny guy, but, you know, but whoever it may be. Like,
yeah,
he talks shit on Twitter sometimes. He'll go back and forth with these guys, but, you know, and eventually, too, if he wants to stay at 135, if Valdez wants to move up eventually, if Shakur Stevenson, because he's definitely going to be moving up soon enough. He's still a young guy. Like, there's a lot going on, man. There's so many chess pieces to put together that we just.
It's a fairly amazing symphony sometimes, you know,
totally.
that it even works at all.
But it's boxing also, man. So you can't get too excited because all this stuff can just fall apart in one fell swoop.
That's true. That is extremely true. So you do kind of got to keep yourself grounded just in
Just
case. Don't get
you
your
just
fucking hopes up.
you talk hypotheticals and you get really hyped and you
I
mention
know you
it.
get me all excited here. Shit.
I mean, yeah, you do, and you think about it, but at the same time, you got to keep a proper perspective on things and be like,
Yeah.
you know what, this fight probably won't happen. This fight probably won't happen. If it does, it's gonna be a few years. Yada yada yada. Put this one in there. Someone might. So
Yeah.
many things like
Yeah.
that.
There's a lot of
Plus,
marination.
if you add in all their outside ring activities too, like you kind of alluded to earlier, then who the hell knows?
Yeah, there's a lot of marination going on these days. Sometimes unnecessary marination.
Thanks, Bob Arum.
Yeah. No, that fight needs time. No, it
or
doesn't. Make it
or
now.
or Angelo Dundee. No, just let it wait. I feel it's gonna be juicy. Okay, it's getting juicy one day. Yeah.
Angelo Dundee. Well, he was a master. He
Well,
and
no,
Chris
no,
were
you know what
master.
though? I shouldn't bring him up for that because he was actually correct and made in his assumption of Hearns Leonard.
Yeah,
So
that's true. That was the
I
perfect time right
apologize,
there.
Angelo. Yeah, I take that back because like that was actually spot on. But Bob
Fly
Arum,
high, Angelo.
yeah, Bob Arum takes all the brunt of his marinating.
Yeah, I guess Aram's just gonna have to take it on this one. No, it's look, dude, we gotta have a good schedule this weekend. Man,
And a good
I'm
schedule in general, man. We have a lot of weeks coming up with a
mhm.
lot of fights. So
Yeah, and I was able to talk to Erickson Lubin. He gave me a couple opinions on the fights coming up this weekend too. So if you wind up after you watch this video or listen to this podcast, go back and check that out because it's
he
fairly
was
short. And
part of one of the best fights of the year. So I mean, definitely worth a listen.
yeah, dude, he was. And you know what? I was actually surprised a little bit that he was kind of pissed. He was like, "No, I don't want to be in the fight of the year. I want to win." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I guess I
I
could see
respect that.
that. That's
Totally.
fair." But
It was a very, very competitive fight too, man. It was one where his face just kind of gave out when it was hard to let
yeah,
it keep on going the way it was. But whether you agree with it or not, the judges had him ahead. I think 2 or 3 judges had him ahead.
like
So
I thought it was fairly close, but he was kind of getting beat up. So I don't really agree that he was ahead. But it
it
was
was just
a
tough.
really good
Like
fight.
I'll say this, he landed the more eye-catching punches
Yeah,
aside from when he got dropped. But like it was just the cumulative effect, just one of those grinding uppercuts,
oh,
by death and just yeah.
that was brutal, man. It was brutal stuff. But yeah, so he, I think that even just on the basis of him, deserving to be heard, you should go check that out. But Aris, dude, I appreciate you discussing the fights this weekend with me,
Yeah,
man.
it's a lot of fun as always, man. I'm really, really looking forward to this weekend and taking it all in and just yeah.
Yeah, may the best fighters win for sure. But hey, everybody who listened in or watched, and I really appreciate it. I know Eris appreciates it too. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, if you listened in to the podcast, wherever it might be, subscribe, leave a comment. And if you also watched on YouTube, subscribe, leave a comment. Always helpful. We're on social media as well. The show is on, for instance, Facebook and Instagram. Also, we're on Twitter, but my buddy Aris is on Twitter himself as Punch Zone Aris. Me, Patrick Connor. I'm on Twitter as Patrick M. Connor. Man, we'll talk soon, Aris.
Absolutely. Have a good one, everyone. Enjoy the fights.